Okay, so this perfectly flows into our chapter 2, justice and rights, the foundation of all order in the world. And if you're looking at the world, and you're looking at countries specifically like our country and like Western civilization, you notice something that is different than other countries. And that is founded on our country, European countries, they're founded on certain Christian Judeo beliefs, right? And other countries in the world that also are founded on that. There's a certain order that comes about it because we recognize that our rights come from something outside of this world. And there's a certain order that comes to that with that. And we recognize that we need commandments. We need this foundation of justice and rights and correction when we do not follow these form of laws and just things that we need to abide by. And when you look at other countries that weren't founded upon that, you do see there's chaos happening. Economically, there's chaos happening in the family, there's chaos happening in their society. We still have chaos happening, but I think it's the root of it. Every time is the root of it that, yes, it's sin, that's the root. But overall, we were founded upon these God-given rights, which is so profound. And people are trying to take away, when we try to take away God out of the picture, there is a bit of a confusion and chaos that happens. And we know, actually, I'm going to take a pause there and talk about that in a second, but just hold the phone there. But your notes here, justice and law. People desire justice in life. We want good things distributed evenly, and we want antisocial behaviors to have consequences. That needs to happen. Consequences need to happen, or else, like I keep saying, chaos will happen. We need those who especially perform major acts of injustice. There needs to be some sort of correction and redirection. Good, and you're back? No. We want antisocial behavior to have consequences. Like I keep saying, there's like an inherently gut human feeling when we know something is wrong, especially when we have well-informed consciences. Rights. Rights are certain goods that have been given to us by nature, and they cannot be taken away from us. They cannot be unjustly taken away from us. Like if you think back to our Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by us by their Creator, by our Creator. And we have certain unalienable rights, and what are they? The right to life. Liberty, yes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They cannot be taken away from us, no matter who wants to try to take it away from us. If they try to take it away from us, we have to tell them this is in our Declaration of Independence. This is what our country was founded upon. We cannot take this away from others. And we see this drama of the human story of constantly trying to redirect people and reform when this doesn't happen. And I think I was listening to a podcast recently from this political comedian guy. He's really interesting. And he was saying, I don't think he makes it clear that he doesn't really, I think he's a Jew, I think. Not sure. But he kind of doesn't really like to talk about religion too much. But he made an interesting statement. He said, if we as a society cannot look up, meaning to God, then we're going to look vertical and try to correct everything here. And I was like, that makes sense. Meaning that if we don't recognize that our rights are coming from an outside source from this earth, then we're going to look vertically and realize, and then we get panicky, thinking that people, men, government, nation can try to take these rights away from us, which we know is false, especially those of us who have faith. But that's why we see so much chaos happening, is because people are believing that, and that makes sense. If you don't have hope that there's something out there that has given you these rights that can't be taken away from you, you're going to try to get perfection happening here. You're trying to redirect people here. And then that's where you see all this anxiety, all this anger, all this hurt happening. Yes, we still need to redirect, reform, and we're broken still. We're all sinners. But there's something when we recognize that nothing here is ever going to be perfect, ever. But we need to try. We need to be on our way for perfection. But there's a peace knowing that. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of people who are just trying to control everything here because they're trying to get perfection here. You kind of agree with what I'm saying, or not understand what I'm saying? Yeah. If not, it's okay if you don't agree or if you don't understand, just holler at me. Society reflects our innate desire for justice. We see it. Systems and structures are put in place. There are laws, there are courts, there are law enforcement that work together to try to make justice happen. We fail, we are confused, but that's what we are founded upon, to keep each other accountable. We don't live in a monarchy, we live in a democracy. And Jesus condemned those who were not just. He did. Does anybody know, who does he specifically call out the most in the Gospels? Who does Jesus call out and say their behavior is not just?
Pharisees?
Yeah. And who are the Pharisees, do you know? Why?
Aren't they blasphemers of that they believe that Jesus' teachings were blasphemous? That's all I know.
Yeah. Well, they believe that Jesus was blasphemous because he was claiming to be God. And that's blasphemy if you're claiming to be God, and they thought that he was God. But at the core, these Sadducees and Pharisees were the teachers. They were like the law enforcers that were educated. They were privileged. They knew the law. But yet they were hypocrites. They were unable to sit with the sinners who were usually ignorant, suffering, healing, and they were unable to recognize the sin in each one of them. Because no human being is perfect. Even these people who were privileged, who were educated, they had sin within them, and they were unable to acknowledge that, and therefore they were hypocrites. So he condemns that. Jesus condemns that unjust behavior, because that's unjust. And that makes me think of the story of the prodigal son. And it makes me think of the part when, the major thing that is usually focused on is that the young son, the story of the prodigal son is the man has two sons. The father has two sons. And the younger son takes the inheritance of the father, the money that would be given to him after the dad was supposed to die. So he asked for the inheritance early, ran off, squandered it, and then realized he did wrong, came back, asked for forgiveness, begged for forgiveness. And the father, of course, is supposed to image Jesus, saying, of course I forgive you, I love you. He welcomes him home. He even throws him a big celebration. It says in Scripture, I love this part when it says in Scripture, and then the celebration began. Boom, that's our God. But then there's another key character that is kind of confusing and we don't always talk about. What's the other guy?
The other brother who's working.
Yeah, the older son.
Yeah.
The other brother that's working, who didn't leave, who is doing his duty, who is trying to love and do what was right for the father. Almost kind of like in a slave kind of manner, like he was just trying to please the father. And I'm reading this book right now. It's called The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen. And there's a really interesting, beautiful phrase. And he says, when he's talking about the older son, he says, there is so much anger and resentment amongst the just, amongst those who are trying to do good, amongst the saints. And I was like, wow, it's intense. I think what he means there is there's a lot of resentment amongst those who, the older son is still not perfect, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're trying to do good, but sometimes that can blind us from our sins. And the older son, what his sin was, he failed to acknowledge that his father was with him. The father says in response when the father comes to the older son and he says, where are you, my son? Why aren't you celebrating with us? And the older son just says, why aren't you, basically he's saying, why aren't you celebrating me? I've stayed with you all this time. I've done all of my work well. Why are you celebrating this younger son who left and squandered everything? And the father says to him, my son. He looks at him with love and says, my son, I am here with you always. Everything that I have is yours. My grace is available to you 24/7. And he failed to remember that. So, just made me think of that, and especially that line. I invite you to think about that, what that means. There's always constant work to be done because we're all sinners. And just to realize when Jesus condemns those who are unjust, he condemns really, especially those who just deny the fact that they are sinners and that we need justice itself, who is God, to help us and to perfect us. Okay. So can someone tell me what justice is if you read, or if you just put it in your own words? What is justice? Holler it out. What is justice? Anybody? Yeah?
Doing right by others.
Doing right by others. Oh, I like how you included the others. That's a biggie. And yeah, it has to do with doing good, doing right, and it includes other people. A virtue, it's a virtue too, so you have to acknowledge that. It's a virtue of having a constant inclination to do good. It's a measure of how well we treat others. And it's one of the 4 cardinal virtues. And it's considered by some of the saints and some people, some philosophers, to be the most important virtue as the cardinal virtues because it has a social dimension. It has other people in mind. And the word cardinal comes from the Latin word cardo, which means hinge, Hinge, which means cardinal virtues are the hinges upon which the door of the moral life opens and closes. The cardinal virtues besides justice are temperance, fortitude, which is another word for courage, and prudence, and of course justice. Those are the 4 cardinal virtues. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing so, especially in in the younger generation, so much chaos happening is because we're failing to learn to talk and to teach about what virtue and vice are and the fundamental importance they are. Even if you don't have any faith back, like you need virtue in order to have a good society. Let's make sure I'm hitting all the points. And that's the goal of our lives, is to live a virtuous life in order to become like God. And it's a habit. Virtues take time. It's a process to cultivate, just like practicing for a sport, building muscle. It's hard because we're also dealing with vices like sin. And if you're anything like me, you're not perfect, and you do fall into sin. And that sin, sometimes you wrestle with a sin for a while because it becomes a habit. Both virtue and vices, sin, are habits. And it takes work to make sure we're more on the virtue spectrum rather than the sin spectrum. There's always grace. We need grace. And that helps us all the more. Forgiveness from our fathers, from the sacraments, and through prayer. But it does take an act of our will. Virtue takes an act, this perseverance of our will to act upon. And to actually educate ourselves. To educate ourselves on what these virtues are, where they come from, what they mean, and how they can shape our society, and even just our own personal selves, our own personal conscience and wills. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Nothing? Okay. That's it. All right, pretty good. So almost every act of virtue or vice will involve justice or injustice. In fact, St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest teachers of our faith, there's a section at the end of chapter 2, which I'll probably assign next week. He spoke of how primary justice is in accordance to the moral virtues. It's a primary virtue that we need to understand, practice, and persevere through, and learn about. And also just to keep in mind that these, especially the cardinal virtues, they are really like these human virtues that every human really experiences. Like I said, everyone really knows what justice is. Prudence, temperance, bless you. Fortitude, another word for courage. It takes courage to step in when someone's bullying someone to say that's not right. It takes courage to go to protests. It takes courage to stand up for the unborn. It takes courage to say Racism is evil. It's divisive. It's divisive. Not an English teacher. Divisive. Which one? Well, ask Miss Sutton. But yeah, there are evils out there. There are injustices out there. And it takes these virtues to act courageously, to act in prudence. Even just anger is good, especially when an injustice is happening. It's okay to have a just anger. And that's naturally going to happen, especially when major hot-button things happen. Major injustices happen, and it leaves us confused, angry, and hurt, and wanting to change something about it. But because we were broken, we need to take a step back and make sure, which is another virtue, that we're prudent, that we acknowledge that we need to take a pause, assess the situation, not act out of fear or anger right away. We need to make sure that we know the truth, we know what's happening, we're listening to both sides, and that we prudently act out of love, because yes, we're seeing, especially now, I'm going to show a video. Actually, we probably won't have time to watch it, so I'll just post it into Teams. Especially these past couple of days, we continue to see these ongoing violent protests, right? Which is not good, not prudent. That is unjust anger, not just anger. Because we cannot defeat evil with more evil. We know that, right? And we see that in our world, in our history. Evil, acting out of evil, more evil, just continues to promote evil and cause more chaos, cause craziness. But it's important to, I think, especially now, reflect and kind of ask ourselves, what's the Christian response? And I'm going to show you a video from a priest that I know in Mount Airy. I think I mentioned to you before, Father Chris. He is a pastor in Mount Airy at St. Raymond Church in Pettiford. Really awesome parish, very vibrant parish. Father Chris is one of the greatest shepherds that I know. And he responds to, what's the Christian response to the death of Walter Wallace and the response to the riots? Because he gives us a 5-step response of how we as Christians can respond to something like this. And if you're interested, I'll post it on Teams. I think it's so really well done. And he's just really grounded and really real. So I'll post that. Yeah, anybody have any comments? No? Is this something that you guys have ever really kind of talked about? Like, what is justice? What is virtue? Yeah, a little bit.
I guess virtue a little more than justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're important. But just want to make sure you put your notes away. Your homework, I think I talked about in the beginning, is just to respond to the John Paul II response, which is posted already. I will post the Father Chris video. You don't have to do a response. Just want you guys to watch it. And then, what am I forgetting? St. Peter Claver is going to be posted tomorrow. So don't worry about responding to it. Unless you see it, you can respond to it over the weekend. But as long as you respond to all the responses before the quiz. So the first quiz is November 10th. Because that's when you'll get your points as a cutoff. Whenever that certain saint's quiz is. Make sure you're doing that. Make sure you do the St. Teresa Calcutta responses. That's part of your grade for your saints. Tuesday. Tuesday, we are not meeting in person because it's election day. I may or may not be having a virtual class depending on when I'm voting. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. Just make sure you are keeping updated in our team's general section, and I will tell you what we're doing, okay? If we're going to meet virtually or if I give you something, okay? Cool. I have to hit stop. Thank you, Stephanie, for telling me to record. That would have been unfortunate.